Brahmin is a varna in Hinduism, specializing as priests, teachers and protectors of sacred learning across generations. Brahmins were traditionally responsible for religious rituals in temples, as intermediaries between temple deities and devotees, as well as rite of passage rituals such as solemnizing a wedding with hymns and prayers. However, Indian texts suggest that Brahmins were often agriculturalists and warriors in ancient and medieval India. Dharma Sutras and Dharma Sastras. The Dharma Sutras and Dharma Sastras text of Hinduism describe the expectations, duties and role of Brahmins. The rules and duties in these Dharma texts of Hinduism are primarily directed at Brahmins. The Gautama's Dharma Sutra, the oldest of surviving Hindu Dharma Sutras, for example, states in verse 9.54 to 9.55 that a Brahmin should not participate or perform a ritual unless he is invited to do so, but he may attend. Gautama outlines the following rules of conduct for a Brahmin in chapters 8 and 9. Be always truthful. Conduct himself as an Aryan. Teach his art only to virtuous men. Follow rules of ritual purification. Study Vedas with delight. Never hurt any living creature. Be gentle but steadfast. Have self-control. Be kind, liberal towards everyone. Chapter 8 of the Dharma Sutra states Olivel asserts the functions of a Brahmin to be to learn the Vedas, the secular sciences, the Vedic supplements, the dialogues, the epics and the Puranas, to understand the texts and pattern his conduct according to precepts contained in these texts, to undertake sanskara and rituals, and lead a virtuous life. The text lists 8 virtues that a Brahmin must inculcate: compassion, patience, lack of envy, purification, tranquility, auspicious disposition, generosity and lack of greed, and then asserts in verse 9.24 to 9.25 that it is more important to lead a virtuous life than perform rites and rituals, because virtue leads to achieving liberation. The later Dharma texts of Hinduism such as Bodhayana Dharma Sutra, charity, modesty, refraining from anger and never being arrogant as duties of a Brahmin. The Vasistha Dharma Sutra in verse 6.23 lists discipline, austerity, self-control, liberality, truthfulness, purity, Vedic learning, compassion, erudition, intelligence and religious faith as characteristics of a Brahmin. In 13.55, the Vasistha text states that a Brahmin must not accept weapons, poison or liquor as gifts. The Dharma Sastras such as Manusmriti, like Dharma Sutras, are codes primarily focused on how a Brahmin must live his life, and the relationship with a king and warrior class. Manusmriti dedicates 1034 verses, the largest portion, on laws for and expected virtues of Brahmins. It asserts, for example, a well-disciplined Brahmin, although he knows just the Savitri verse, is far better than an undisciplined one who eats all types of food and deals in all types of merchandise, though he may know all 3 Vedas. John Busanich states that the ethical precepts set for Brahmins in ancient Indian texts are similar to Greek virtue ethics, that Manu's Dharmic Brahmin can be compared to Aristotle's man of practical wisdom, and that the virtuous Brahmin is not unlike the Platonic Aristotelian philosopher, with the difference that the latter was not sacerdotal. Normative occupations of a Brahmin. The Gautama Dharma Sutra states in verse 10.3 that it is obligatory on a Brahmin to learn and teach the Vedas. Chapter 10 of the text, according to Olivel translation, states that he may impart Vedic instructions to a teacher, relative, friend, elder, anyone who offers exchange of knowledge he wants, or anyone who pays for such education. The Chapter 10 adds that a Brahmin may also engage in agriculture, trade, lend money on interest, while Chapter 7 states that a Brahmin may engage in the occupation of a warrior in the times of adversity. Typically, asserts Gautama Dharma Sutra, a Brahmin should accept any occupation to sustain himself but avoid the occupations of a Shudra. But if his life is at stake, a Brahmin may sustain himself by accepting occupations of a Shudra. The text forbids a Brahmin from engaging in the trade of animals for slaughter, meat, medicines and milk products even in the times of adversity. The Apastamba Dharma Sutra asserts in verse 1.20.10 that trade is generally not sanctioned for Brahmins, but in the times of adversity he may do so. The Chapter 1.20 of Apastamba, states Olivel, forbids the trade of the following under any circumstances: human beings, meat, skins, weapons, barren cows, sesame seeds, pepper, and merits. The first millennium CE Dharma Sastras that followed the Dharma Sutras contain similar recommendations on occupations for a Brahmin, both in prosperous and normal times, and in the times of adversity. The widely studied Manusmriti, for example, states, except during a time of adversity, a Brahmin ought to sustain himself by following a livelihood that causes little or no harm to creatures. He should gather wealth just sufficient for his subsistence through irreproachable activities that are specific to him, without fatiguing his body. He must never follow a worldly occupation for the sake of livelihood, but subsist by means of a pure, upright and honest livelihood proper to a Brahmin. One who seeks happiness should become supremely content and self-controlled, for happiness is rooted in contentment and its opposite is the root of unhappiness. 4.11 to 4.12 The Manusmriti recommends that a Brahmin's occupation must never involve forbidden activities such as producing or trading poison, weapons, meat, trapping birds and others. It also lists 6 occupations that it deems proper for a Brahmin: teaching, studying, offering yajna, officiating at yajna, giving gifts and accepting gifts. Of these, states Manusmriti, 3 which provide a Brahmin with a livelihood are teaching, officiating at yajna, and accepting gifts. The text states that teaching is best, and ranks the accepting of gifts as the lowest of the 6. In the times of adversity, Manusmriti recommends that a Brahmin may live by engaging in the occupations of the warrior class, or agriculture or cattle herding or trade. Of these, Manusmriti in verses 10.83 to 10.84 recommends a Brahmin should avoid agriculture if possible because, according to Olivel translation, agriculture involves injury to living beings and dependence of others when the plough digs the ground and injures the creatures that live in the soil. However, adds Manusmriti, even in the times of adversity, a Brahmin must never trade or produce poison, weapons, meat, soma, liquor, perfume, milk and milk products, molasses, captured animals or birds, beeswax, sesame seeds or roots. Brahmin and renunciation tradition in Hinduism. The term Brahmin in Indian texts has signified someone who is good and virtuous, not just someone of priestly class. Both Buddhist and Brahmanical literature, states Patrick Olivel, repeatedly define Brahmin not in terms of family of birth, but in terms of personal qualities. These virtues and characteristics mirror the values cherished in Hinduism during the sannyasa stage of life, or the life of renunciation for spiritual pursuits. Brahmins, states Olivel, were the social class from which most ascetics came. History. According to Abraham O'Reilly, Brahmin as a varna hardly had any presence in historical records before the Gupta Empire era, and no Brahmin, no sacrifice, no ritualistic act of any kind ever, even once, is referred to in any Indian text dated to be from the 1st century CE or before. The role as priest priests and repository of sacred knowledge, as well as their importance in the practice of Vedic Shraddha rituals, grew during the Gupta Empire era and thereafter. However, the knowledge about actual history of Brahmins or other varnas of Hinduism in and after first millennium is fragmentary and preliminary, with little that is from verifiable records or archaeological evidence, and much that is constructed from a historical Sanskrit works and fiction. Michael Witzel writes, toward a history of the Brahmins, current research in the area is fragmentary. The state of our knowledge of this fundamental subject is preliminary, at best. Most Sanskrit works are ahistoric or at least not especially interested in presenting a chronological account of India's history. When we actually encounter history, such as in Rajatarangini or in the Gopala Vamsavali of Nepal, the texts do not deal with Brahmins in great detail. Actual occupations of Brahmins, historical records, state scholars, suggest that Brahman varna was not limited to a particular state as a priest and teaching profession. Historical records from mid-first millennium CE and later suggest Brahmins were agriculturalists and warriors in medieval India, quite often instead of as exception. Donkin and other scholars state that Hoysala Empire records frequently mention Brahmin merchants carried on trade in horses, elephants and pearls, and transported goods throughout medieval India before the 14th century. The Pali Canon expresses Hindu Brahmins as the most prestigious and elite non-Buddhist figures. These and other Buddhist texts record the livelihood of Brahmins to have included handicrafts and artisan work such as carpentry and architecture. Buddhist sources extensively attest, state Greg Bailey and Ian Mabbutt, that Brahmins were supporting themselves not by religious practice, but employment in all manner of secular occupations in the classical period of India. Some of the Hindu Brahmin occupations mentioned in the Buddhist texts such as Jatakas and Sattanipata are very lowly. According to Haidar and Siddhar, in the Islamic sultanates of the Deccan region, and unlike the Mughal Empire, Telangana Yogi Brahmins served the Muslim sultans in many different roles such as accountants, ministers, revenue administration and in judicial service. During the days of Maratha Empire in the 17th and 18th century, the occupation of Marathi Brahmins ranged from administration to being warriors in Shivaji's army. Eric Bellman states that during the Islamic Mughal Empire era, Brahmins served as advisors to the Mughals, later to the British Raj. The East India Company recruited from the Brahmin communities of the present-day Uttar Pradesh and Bihar regions for the Bengal army. Many Brahmins in other parts of South Asia lived like other varna, engaged in all sorts of professions. Among Nepalese Hindus, for example, Niels Guts Chow and Axel Michaels report the actual observed professions of Brahmins from 18th to early 20th century included being temple priests, minister, merchants, farmers, potters, masons, carpenters, coppersmiths, stoneworkers, barbers, gardeners, among others. Other 20th century surveys, such as in the state of Uttar Pradesh, recorded that the primary occupation of almost all Brahmin families surveyed was neither priestly nor Vedist-related, but like other varnas, ranged from crop farming, dairy, service, labor such as cooking, and other occupations. The survey reported that the Brahmin families involved in agriculture as the primary occupation in modern times plough the land themselves, many supplementing their income by selling the labor services to other farmers. Brahmins, Bhakti movement and social reform movements. Sheldon Pollock states that the Bhakti movement, which moved away from Vedic rituals and emphasized love of God by anyone without barrier to gender, class or caste, was a movement whose prominent thinkers and earliest champions were Brahmins. Among the many Brahmins who nurtured the Bhakti movement was Ramananda, a 14th-century devotional poet. Sant Born in a Brahmin family, Ramananda welcomed everyone to spiritual pursuits without discriminating anyone by gender, class, caste or religion. He composed his spiritual message in poems, using widely spoken vernacular language rather than Sanskrit to make it widely accessible. His ideas also influenced the founders of Sikhism in 15th century, and his verses and here mentioned in the Sikh scripture Adi Granth. The Hindu tradition recognizes him as the founder of the Hindu Ramanandi Sampradaya, the largest monastic renunciant community in Asia in modern times. Other medieval-era Brahmins who led spiritual movement without social agenda discrimination included Andal, Basava, Dnyaneshwar, the Vallabharacharya, among others. Many 18th and 19th century Brahmins are credited with religious movements that criticized idolatry. For example, the Brahmins Raja Ram Mohan Roy led Brahmo Samaj and Dayananda Saraswati led the Arya Samaj. Modern demographics and economic condition. According to 2007 reports, Brahmins in India are about 5% of its total population. The Himalayan states of Uttarakhand and Himachal Pradesh have the highest percentage of Brahmin population relative to respective states' total. Hindus. According to a Wall Street Journal report, an estimated 65% of the Brahmin households in India, with about 40 million people, lived on less than $100 a month in 2004. This number dropped to about 50% in 2007. Brahmins have also included wealthier and politically successful members. Brahmins in Buddhist and Jain texts. The term Brahmin appears extensively in ancient and medieval sutras and commentary texts of Buddhism and Jainism. In Buddhist Pali Canon, such as the Majjhima Nikaya and Devadaha Sutta, first written down about 1st century BCE, the Buddha is attributed to be mentioning Jain Brahmins and ascetics, as he describes the Karma doctrine and ascetic practices. The Blessed One said, "There are, O monks, some ascetics and Brahmins who speak thus and are of such opinion. Whatever a particular person experiences, whether pleasant or painful, or neither pleasant nor painful, all this has thus say, O monks, those free of bonds, O Niganthas, you... Modern scholars state that such usage of the term Brahmin in ancient texts does not imply a caste, but simply masters, guardian or recluse, preacher or guide of any tradition. An alternate synonym for Brahmin in the Buddhist and other non-Hindu tradition is Mahano. Brahmins outside India, Myanmar, Thailand, Cambodia and Indonesia. Further information. Hinduism in Southeast Asia. Some Brahmins formed an influential group in Burmese Buddhist kingdoms in 18th and 19th century. The court Brahmins were locally called Punna. During the Konbaum dynasty, Buddhist kings relied on their court Brahmins to consecrate them to kingship in elaborate ceremonies, and to help resolve political questions. This role of Hindu Brahmins in a Buddhist kingdom, states Slider, may have been because Hindu texts provide guidelines for such social rituals and political ceremonies, while Buddhist texts don't. The Brahmins were also consulted in the transmission, development and maintenance of law and justice system outside India. Hindu Dharma Sastras, particularly Manusmriti written by the Brahmin Manus, states Anthony Reid, were greatly honored in Burma, Siam, Cambodia and Java Bali as the defining documents of law and order, which kings were obliged to uphold. They were copied, translated and incorporated into local law code, with strict adherence to the original text in Burma and Siam, and a stronger tendency to adapt to local needs in Java. The mythical origins of Cambodia are credited to a Brahmin prince named Kaundinya, who arrived by sea, married a Naga princess living in the flooded lands. Kaundinya founded Kambuja Desa, or Kambuja. Kaundinya introduced Hinduism, particularly Brahma, Vishnu's Shiva and Harihara, and these ideas grew in Southeast Asia in the first millennium CE. Brahmins have been part of the royal tradition of Thailand, particularly for the consecration and to mark annual land fertility rituals of Buddhist kings. A small Brahmanical temple Devasathan, established in 1784 by King Rama I of Thailand, has been managed by ethnically Thai Brahmins ever since. The temple hosts Phra Phakanizhuan, Phra Nare, Phra Itsuan, Uma, Brahma, Indra and other Hindu deities. The tradition asserts that the Thai Brahmins have roots in Hindu holy city of Varanasi and southern state of Tamil Nadu, go by the title Pandita, and the various annual rites and state ceremonies they conduct has been a blend of Buddhist and Hindu rituals.